All right, so we're going to do a tutorial here to go over a server setup, establish some passwordless sign-in, and make a Python web page. So the scenario here is, let's just say you are working in a company and your manager or director or someone gives you a cloud resource. They say, here's a server. Here you go. This is what we're giving you in order for you to do some work. And here's the IP address. Here's the password, here's the user, here's the host name, here are the things that you need to do. So they tell us, all right, here's the resource, and here's the objectives. You need to set up the server, finish setting up the server. You need to be able to set up some passwordless sign-in, and you need to be able to create a Python web page. So for whatever reason, those are your objectives that they give you, and then this is the resource that they give you, all right? So objectives there, and we're gonna put resource here, okay? So this is how we're going to break this down is essentially I'm running a Ubuntu virtual machine on top of my Windows machine. But let's just say I have all the environment information that I need, and so now we're just going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to be using DigitalOcean for this exercise, and everything I'm doing is going to be following the tutorials that are already given here. So we're going to be following the exercise based off of the initial server setup with Ubuntu. We're also going to be doing the exercise on setting up SSH keys on Ubuntu, installing Python and setting up programming environment, and an application using Flask Python. All right. So for starters, the first thing we're going to want to do is just make sure that we can access the thing. So let's just quickly ping 146.190.160.151. Now, mind you, maybe your server is going to be different, right? This is just a demo server for the purposes of being able to illustrate this. But if you're given your own IP address, you're going to want to first make sure that you can actually ping the thing and you can connect to the device itself. And that's where we're going to start with SSH. We're going to SSH into our machine. By default, we're going to SSH as the root user. So we're going to SSH into 146.190.160.151. All right, and here it's going to ask if we want to, if we trust the machine. We're going to say yes. And now it's going to ask us for a password. So let's just check that our password works. And there we go. We are in the Ubuntu Cloud Server. All right, the host name right there, Ubuntu Cloud Server. Now, sometimes what a lot of people get confused when they're starting off with this is the distinction between the host machine and the cloud server machine. So essentially, the way we can distinguish this is that when I see, for example, here, Gabriel at DevOps, right? This is my user, right? This is the host name. This is my client machine. This is going to be my virtual machine here. This is essentially this desktop that you're seeing. When I go to root at Ubuntu Cloud Server, this is my cloud machine. Not because it's called cloud, right? But because I'm actually SSHing into this. We can even confirm this by looking at the IP address and seeing that they are indeed they indeed have different configurations, right? Not just that, we are using different machines. Here we're using a Linux-based machine. Actually, I should probably get more details there. Let's do name-a. All right, so here we have our Ubuntu Cloud Server. It's giving us their specifications for the machine. And then here we're on a different machine. Okay. So the idea here is that we're going to be able to set this up so that we're working off the client machine, and then we're going to be connecting to our cloud machine. So right now we're on the cloud, all right? So this here, when we see this is going to be our cloud server. And the first thing we have to do is we're going to have to, now that we're SSH'd and we're logged into our cloud server, we need to set up a user because it's not a good idea to always use root. Remember, when it comes to Linux systems, root is the highest level user, so we're not going to want to use that at all. We're going to want to simplify this by, and actually enhance our security a bit by having a generic user with administrative privileges for our purposes to be able to access this. On your day-to-day tasks, you do not want to be accessing it as root. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create a new user. So I'm going to do user mod -ag sudo, and I'm going to call my user Gabriel, or just Gabe. All right. So it says user mod, user Gabe does not exist. That's fine. Oh, I missed a step here. We have to add the user first. So we're going to add user Gabe. All right, so here we're going to give Gabe a password. Just going to keep something very simple. Okay, we're going to type it again. By the way, for those of you who are working with the command line for the first time, when you put in a password, it's not going to show you what you type. All right, that's just the way Linux works. So if you're using a Linux machine, well, actually, in this case, we are because we're using a cloud-based server machine that's using Linux. It's not going to show you the password that you type. A lot of times, for people who use this for the first time, they think it's not working. Believe me, whatever you type in there is being caught on. So if you're going to be putting in a new password, and then you have to retype that password, it's not going to display it. So you can enter some arbitrary information here. You can actually leave most of this blank. It's not information. It's not really important other than the password, at least for our purposes and demonstration purposes. Usually, though, if you're actually managing a group of users, you probably want to include some of that information. So now that we've added our user, now we can do the next command, which I actually skipped to before. User mod -ag, okay, and we're going to give them administrator privileges or sudo privileges, Gabe. All right. So now we can actually sign in and utilize this user here. We can run sudo -s Gabe. Oops. So we'll sign in as Gabe by doing sudo su-gabe. All right. And now on my cloud server, I can access the cloud server as Gabe. And this is great because remember, we do not want to be accessing this as a root user. That's a terrible idea. All right. And in fact, we can actually exit the cloud server, exit as roots. There. Now we're back on the client machine. Okay. So here I'm on my client machine. So now let's go ahead and try to SSH back into this machine. But this time, all right, instead of as root, we're going to sign in as Gabe. Sure enough, ask me for my password. There we go. Now we're signed in. Now, there's a couple of other things that we have to do. Um, for one, we're going to have to set up our firewall, and we're also going to want to move on and try to set up some passwordless sign-in because it's going to be a lot if I have to put in a password every single time. And that's just something that we're going to want to probably make our lives easier there. So let's go ahead and clear this. And let's go ahead and check our firewall here. So we're going to just run the uncomplicated firewall. And oh, I'm going to have to be root for that, so I can just do sudo fw app list. Okay, get my password. And there I can see I have OpenSSH running. Perfect, that's really all I really need. So I will need to make sure that the SSH is running. And if I didn't have SSH running, what I could do is to make sure I allow OpenSSH for whatever reason. Let's say it wasn't running. I can do allow OpenSSH. All right. Oh, I keep forgetting. I'm gonna have to do sudo every time. Allow OpenSSH. All right. And there we go. We have our rules updated. Just gonna make my life easier and just run these right now on root. All right, so we have our our uncomplicated firewall enabled. All right, it's already running. Here it's going to say I might lose connection, but it's already active, so there's nothing really changing there. And if I want to check what's running right now, I can just run a status. Okay, and there I can see I have OpenSSH, and that's pretty much everything that I need. All right, so I'm the administrator for this cloud server. If I wanted to create another user, I would just follow the earlier steps of just doing of adding a new user, but not giving them administrative privileges. But in this case, we're good to go. We have our uncomplicated firewall set up. we've set up a new user so that way it's going to be Gabe signing in instead of the root user. And now we can proceed on to the next step, which is so we finished essentially setting up our server. Now let's go ahead and set up some passwordless sign-in just to make our lives a little bit easier. So what we're going to do here is now we're going to want to switch over to the client machine. So notice I'm back on my client machine. Okay, here I'm working under Gabriel DevOps, which is my client machine, which is actually this operating system here of Ubuntu. And what I want to do in order to be able to do some passwordless sign-in is I'm going to want to generate some SSH keys. I'm just going to do SSH keygen. All right, and right there you see it's going to start creating my key pair. Okay, and here's asking where I want to save the keys. I'm going to leave it in the default location, home Gabriel /.ssh /id underscore RSA. And I'm just not going to change anything there. In this case, I don't want to paraphrase, so I'm just going to leave it empty, leave the paraphrase again, and you can see that my key gets generated. All right, pretty straightforward. So I have my output here, which is giving me my key. And so now that I have my public and private key set, I can now use this to be able to authenticate. So now what I'm going to want to do from my client machine, I'm going to want to copy this. So I'm going to do SSH copy ID to Gabe at my cloud server 146.190.160.151. All right, so just remember, when you're doing this, you are creating the SSH key from your client machine. That's the one that you're locally working with. Your cloud or virtual machine or your machine on the cloud, that's going to be on a different network. That's going to be outside of your client machine. So don't confuse the two. Make your SSH key from the client machine in order to do passwordless sign-in into the cloud machine. So I did my SSH keygen on my client machine. I received my keys. I can now do my SSH copy ID, and I'm going to send it to my cloud server. So there, it's sharing the keys. It's asking me, okay, well, what's your password for the cloud server for this user? And again, remember, when you're using Linux, it's not going to show you the password that you're typing. All right, perfect. So now it says that it took the keys, and now I should be able to sign in with just by doing SSH Gabe at 146.190.160.151. All right, so let's give this a try. And if it works, I should be able to log in without doing a password. Oops. Make sure there's no semicolons or anything like that when you're entering this. There we go. It works. So I no longer need to put in a password. I just have to do SSH Gabe 146.190.160.151 to be able to access my cloud server. So you can see here, I went from my host machine or client machine to my cloud server. So now we've completed our first two tasks. We've set up our server. Remember, we created a new user. We're not working with the root user anymore. We also configured our uncomplicated firewall, which by the way was already set up for us, but we just went ahead and double checked that. Then after that, we did a passwordless sign-in, so we made our lives a little bit easier. So now let's go ahead and start working on the Python web page so that way we can get this active. And this is where we're going to be setting up essentially a Python environment to run Flask. And this is going to allow us to just quickly mock up a prototype, if you will, or a demonstration of a web page. So first thing we're going to want to do is on our cloud server, let me just clean this up here. And I'll make this a little bigger too. Oops. There we go. Probably easier to read now. So first, now that we're in the cloud server, before we do any other further installations, and in fact, I kind of skipped ahead and we probably should have done this during the initial setup as well too, but it's always good to do just an update as well, just to make sure that we have everything that we need. All right. So let's make sure our packages are up to date, and we're going to want to make sure that before we do any installations that all the versions are up to date for everything. So Seems like everything is good there, and we're just going to do an upgrade as well too. Again, this was something I skipped and probably should have done in the initial server setup, but it's good practice to do and shouldn't take too long because when we spun this up as a virtual machine, it would probably get most everything that we needed. And sure enough, everything's pretty well up to date.